Sup, Snatch. As part of my contribution to pulling this board out of the mire of gloom, I'm creating this thread. I don't know why I called it Panopticum. It's just the first thing that popped into my head. It's the name of the house I live in. The house stands on the outskirts of the city, next to a park with a statue of Lenin, a vacant lot behind the park, and a wooded area behind the vacant lot. The house is 9 stories high, in the shape of an L, and stands apart from the neighborhood buildings. I am a programmer at the local branch of Ross Telecom, 27, unmarried, novice alkanaut. I will not give any more information, so as not to dox myself. Well, in general, do not count on this thread for pics with sauce, specific names/addresses, video footage from a smartphone, and all that. None of that is going to happen. But there will be cool pastas I've collected during my time living in our town. It's not exactly an ordinary town, it's a little crusty. Lots of tales and legends. You listen to the locals, there's a hex lurking in every corner. I myself have been caught several times in the strange stories, about them will be written below. And in general, it really has its own oppressive atmosphere. In summer the weather is overcast 2/3 of the day, yet the sea is close. Half of the buildings in the city are the same gray boxes of 5-storied buildings. There is a chemical plant that throws a ton of wonderful and healthy substances into the river from where we drink water. Anyway, for a decadence adult hick like me, it's perfect, even satisfying. This is going to be a long thread. I've got a lot of stories, some I wrote down in my little journal back when I was a punk. Some are quite interesting, some are terribly banal and unoriginal. I'll try to mix them up somehow, so that in general I get an average level, and will describe cool stories that I myself have witnessed. I'll number the stories in the n out of 100 thread for epicness, although I don't think 100 stories will make it. Although I don't know, if you ask my grandmother, you might get 200 of them. I will try to write 1 story a day, but I cannot guarantee the strict schedule. The stories themselves will be described concisely, without the artistry and pages on 3 screens. Chukchas are not writers. I'll try not to get lost until I remember all the local creepypastas I know and real cases. In other words, Anon won't be happy. The green ball. I have to start somewhere. I'll start with a real-life incident that happened about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was still a student. 3 guys from the 9th grade at our high school number 3, went into the woods. I don't know what they were doing there, maybe they were drinking, maybe they were just taking a walk. The point is that only 2 of them came back from the woods, fucked up and shitting themselves. They took the cops to a clearing in the woods, and there was a corpse of their 3rd friend lying there. It looked like a corpse, a completely burned body with a black crust, only white teeth grinning. The cops were fucked up too. The school children said that they were sitting here in a clearing, not disturbing anyone, and then a green ball about the size of a handball flew out of the woods. It flew silently about a meter above the ground. The guys noticed it, but they weren't frightened, and they didn't go near the ball. The ball was flying about 200 meters away from them, sometimes changing direction and altitude. Its size and color did not change. Then one of the school children, the burnt out motherfucker, blew his whistle for some reason, like calling out an animal. The ball exploded from the spot and literally flew right into his fucking face in 2 to 3 seconds at a good velocity. The kid instantly lit up and just sat there and went down. He didn't even shout anything. The fucked up friends got up and ran. That's the way it was. They also said that the autopsy revealed that all the kid's blood inside had either sintered or turned to jelly, in general, like what happens when someone is exposed to extremely high temperatures for a short time. Maybe it's a fantasy, though. But it's true that the kid really died. By the way, they say that it didn't rain that day, although ball lightning can appear in clear weather as well. Forest Lane. The clearing behind the vacant lot I mentioned in the OP post is a separate topic. They say there's a suicide forest in Japan, but that's bullshit. In our forest, 1 or 2 people a year hang themselves. There don't seem to be any barren years in my memory. All kinds of underage motherfuckers who got dumped by their girlfriend or didn't pass their unified state exam, alcoholics, homeless people, and normal people, too. And for some reason all of them were in this part of the fucking city. It would seem that the city is surrounded by woods on 3 sides, so you can hang yourself anywhere, but no, everyone goes to this particular vacant lot, reaches the edge, and there, pulls the noose on themselves. My neighbor to the right, during a joint smoke break in the entryway, even once told me a fucking story about how he and his brother watched from the balcony how the cops were picking up another loser who had been cut down from the fucking tree. The distance there is decent, they had the same binoculars, LOL, and they were literally snatching them out of each other's hands. Grandmothers, and not just them, believe that the forest is cursed, with bad energy. Well, they wouldn't even consider otherwise. I sometimes walk through those places, the forest is like a forest, the sun shines, birds sing, grass, moss. There is no sense of cosmic horror on an even footing. There was one suicide this year, in April, another student had a fight with his parents, got drunk and was swinging from a tree in the morning. Maybe by the end of the year someone else will be suicidal in this forest lane. In Before Yourself. The Black Hand. I have an older sister, she's 34 now. She's been a little fucked up since she was a kid, thinks she's a witch or a psychic, and is into all kinds of amulets, conspiracies, potions, etc. I never really took her hobby seriously, although some of her stories are pretty serious. I'll try to tell you all of her stories that I remember. Well, my sister and I have this interpersonal meme, to say hello to the Black Hand, that means, suddenly I shit my pants, like yesterday I was in the bathtub and suddenly the light went out, it was dark, so I said hello to the Black Hand. I came home from the store and realized that they charged me 100 rubles and said hello to the Black Hand, etc. The origin of the meme comes from a cryptic story my sister used to tell me when I was a total pussy, in the 1st or 2nd grade. I don't know if she made it up, but I was a real prick back then. Anyway, it was the mid-90s, my sister was a typical teenage bum girl, and she and her girlfriends used to go to their houses without their parents. That time they went to some kid's house in the countryside from the same class, listened to a tape recorder, watched TV, and the guys and some girls drank beer, while my sister didn't drink back then. My sister wanted to go to the toilet, but it was already quite dark outside, and she was afraid to go out alone. Since childhood she has always been afraid of the dark, and she asked my classmate to accompany her. There was also a German Shepherd dog in the yard, but it was on a leash. Naturally, the dog was extremely hostile to strangers in the yard and began to fiercely bark and pull the chain, causing my sister even more trembling. In short, both girls quickly walked to the toilet at the back of the yard, and my sister went in, leaving her friend outside to be afraid of the angry dog. While the sister was doing her business, they were chatting through the door with her friend about things, then the friend suddenly laughed and said that the guys were hiding behind the fence and wanted to scare them. The fence was very close to the latrine and was quite holy, the boards were falling off. After that, my friend went to the fence to burn the jokers, and how she screamed. My sister was frightened out of her wits. After a couple of seconds, the friend ran back into the house, screaming like a siren, and then my sister felt mega fucked, because the fence was clearly in some kind of trouble, and she was alone in the dark next to the fence. So my sister, too, quickly jumped out of the latrine and ran into the house. Strangely enough, the sheepdog stopped reacting to her friend's screaming and to my sister, she stopped barking and got into her doghouse in a jiffy, even though she had been loudly expressing her furious hatred non-stop since the girls came out of the house. Back at the house, the hysterical friend was given tea, calmed down, and asked what had happened. She replied that she had seen someone's silhouette behind the fence where the board had fallen out, thought it was their guys, and decided to scare them herself. She went quietly to the fence and stood next to the hole, so that if there was any activity, she could immediately burn the jokers. After a couple of seconds a hand came out of the hole, and she grabbed it, but it turned out that it was not a fucking human hand, it was all covered with hard black hair. The hand started pulling her friend toward her, and the first time it pulled her so hard that she tore the sleeve of her blouse against the edge of the fence board. Well, she started yelling and struggling, thinking that the hand was going to drag her the fuck into the woods. Then somehow she got free, or the hand let go of her, and she ran into the house. My sister told me that after the story, the whole group went out and looked at the fence with flashlights. One of the planks next to the hole was really loose and cracked along the fence. Barracks. My mama's grandfather told me a story like this. He's dead now, died in 2011. In the 60s, he was involved in a big construction project. They were cutting down the forest at the southern end of town and building a new block of apartments, the dreary gray boxes I was talking about, now called the 101st block. They built barracks for the construction workers who came from out of town and those who didn't want to be away from their workplace. Grandpa used to sleep in those barracks, too, though he could have gone home, but he liked the construction atmosphere, drinking with the men in the evenings, playing cards, and all that. At first he was fine, but then two of his barracks drinking buddies disappeared. They went to bed with everyone else in the evening, and in the morning they were gone, though all their stuff was still there. Well, at first everyone said fuck it, but when a couple of days went by and these guys still hadn't shown up for at least their pants and documents, the foreman turned to the cops. They seemed to be investigating something, questioning the construction workers, but they were unable to find out anything. Grandpa was also questioned, but he was not intimately acquainted with the missing people and had no idea where the fuck they might have gone. And by autumn, one night Grandpa said hello to the Black Hand. It was already cold, the construction site had stopped, everyone got their paychecks and fucked off. Grandpa was one of the last to stay there. He had some kind of dispute with the bosses, his friends had been overpaid, no labor days, and he had to work for them as a witness that they had really worked at the site. Anyway, there were only two of them left in the barracks, my grandfather and some construction worker he did not know. They took turns getting up once a night to put firewood in the fireplace. Well, Grandpa got up on his turn, lit the fire, and lay down again. But he could not sleep. He had been tossing and turning on the couch for an hour, but could not fall asleep. And then he heard something scratching under the couch, like a cat or a mouse. But there were no animals in the barrack. Grandpa looks under the couch, nothing. He lay down again, scratching again. He looks again, shines the lantern, nothing again. Grandpa goes outside to take a piss, comes back, lies down. Just started dozing off when someone tried to pull him off the bed by his leg. Grandpa got the fuck up, jumped up, inspected the whole barrack. It was empty, the fireplace was burning nicely, the barrack neighbor was peacefully sleeping in the far corner. Grandpa went back to bed. Of course, he was fucked up, but he didn't make a big fuss. He was an atheist, communist, materialist, all that. Even when he was telling me the story, he kept emphasizing his non-serious attitude to what was happening, saying that he could have dreamt it all, but because of the short circuit in his brain, he had mistaken the dream events for reality, making jokes. In general, that night my grandfather did not get a good night's sleep. As soon as he fell asleep, an invisible dick tugged at his leg, and once he even fell off the bed. In the morning he got used to it, woke up, picked up his leg, rolled over on the other side and went back to sleep. In the morning, when it was already light, he woke up again, but because he was dragged by his leg, he heard again some kind of stirring under the couch. He waited a while, thinking it was going to go quiet, but it didn't. Then he rolled over on the bedpost and looked down to peek under the bed again, and that's when he laid down a ton of bricks. From under the couch the blubbery head of one of the very workmen who had disappeared during the summer was sticking out and looking at him curiously. Grandpa ran out into the street at jet speed, and there he came to his senses for a long time. When he returned back to the barracks, of course, there was no construction worker under the couch. He didn't spend the night in the barracks after that. Those missing people, by the way, were never found, and even if they were, my grandfather didn't know about it. Visiting a friend. So, it's time for the first fucking story of the OP's life. As I've written before, the incidents that have happened to me personally are not really creepy, but just weird. I usually understood their strangeness in hindsight. I was, I think, 13, maybe 14. A friend of mine had a PlayStation and I used to go and play with him after school. He liked playing MK3 with me and I was more into the first Silent Hill he had. The translation was a fucking mess, with the Russian voiceover by a monotonous douche voice, but I liked running around the 3D city and killing polygonal creatures more than doing fatalities. My friend had all the combinations written down on a notebook page, which was always lying next to the console. Usually, I went to him after lunch, my friend was home alone, and my parents at work. We watched the new episode of Pokemon on ORT, I think they showed it at about 3 o'clock every day, and started to play PlayStation. After about half an hour my friend fucked off to the store, I can't remember why, either because he remembered that his mom told him to buy something for dinner or we decided to get some chocolate soda. So I was alone, and I switched to my favorite Silent Hill and started playing it while he was gone. And some fucking chick walks in the room. Never seen her before in my life. I was really surprised because I thought no one was in the apartment. Anyway, it was a 3-room apartment, someone could have been sleeping in the bedroom the whole time, but why didn't my friend tell me that? The chick looked plain, about 25 to 30, with long hair, wearing homely clothes like a monochrome blouse and jeans. So I said hello to her, because I'm a polite boy at my friend's mom's. She said hi and asked where Danya, my friend, was. I said he went to the store. And then she freaked me out by pointing out that I had thrown a gum wrapper on the floor and told me to pick it up quickly and not to litter. I hated and still hate it when unfamiliar dicks with arrogant faces start making all sorts of criticisms to me. But what can I do? I'm in a marvelous house, I huffed, but I picked up the wrapper and put it in my pocket. She then went over to the window, started looking at something down there, 3rd floor. I even got a chance to check out her ass covered in jeans, LOL, teenage hormones. Then she said something else insignificant to me, I forget what it was, but something very casual, and left the room. I continued to play. After a while my friend came back, I opened the door for him and as soon as he got in I asked him who this chick was and why he didn't tell me about her. He was very surprised and said he was alone in the apartment. I couldn't believe it, because I had just had a conversation with a moralizing chick myself. We went through all the rooms, and even looked in the closet. That's where I croaked. The assumption that it could have been some migrant who had entered the apartment while my friend was away was rejected at once, because my friend's paranoid parents had instilled in their son the idea that it was impossible to leave the apartment door unlocked even for a moment, and so he made me. During his trips to the store, lock the door behind him from the inside after he left, and open it when he came back. There was also a theory that the chick was a relative, she knew my friend by name, and had her own keys, but I had not heard, by Allah and Buddha I swear, the apartment door open when my friend was away, and the hearing in the apartment was excellent, and the sound of games was not so loud, and b. I described the girl to my friend in great detail, and this description did not match up with any of the relatives he knew. Then he was telling this incident to his parents, who also told him, they don't have such a relative. To cut a long story short, I was very puzzled by the fucking incident. A week later, My friend was hit by a car. I was kidding, of course, although it would have made some sense, like death was coming for him, but he wasn't home, then returned a week later. The friend is still alive, but he fucked off to St. Petersburg, and I haven't been in touch with him for a long time. Faces. Another cool story from my sister, then. She studied in St. Petersburg after high school. Half of our graduates go to St. Petersburg. I am the only autistic hick who preferred to get his education in his native Zabotinsky in order not to go far from his mother's house, and if in her adolescence her schizotherapy was not so pronounced, then in St. Petersburg she found a group of people just as crazy as she was, and there she went full throttle. In the end, she couldn't find a place to live after college and returned to her native land, but her stories about the occultist wannabes in St. Petersburg made me fucking laugh. For example, some fucker there told her that for another ritual to summon the hell demon, he should whip her 30 times on her wrists, and she didn't mind. So, she wore long-sleeved blouses for a long time, and the demon never showed up, but my sister wasn't embarrassed. Well, some people just have the wrong brains without a chance to straighten them out. I saw that in my sister's example. To the point. There was one girl in their circle of witch doctors, either Tanya or Galia, her name was, I do not remember exactly. So this Tanya, let it be so, was a big junkie. My sister didn't know what she was on, because she didn't know about that shit. The thing about Tanya was that she had been telling everyone that she was seeing faces on literally every surface ever since. Anons, have you seen the, are you a fucking bitch, pictures with all the chairs, faucets, purses, etc. Here's something similar, only this Tanya saw a face even on a perfectly smooth surface with no protrusions or drawings. My sister told me how once they were going down in the subway and her friend saw a face right on the smooth wall by the escalator and started streaming to her the speech of this non-existent face. You'll say, well, crazy dumbass, but what's the big deal? Well, according to my sister, who is also pretty fucked up, so I personally don't take her word 100%, in general, the messages that were broadcast to this chick by those faces were usually very true. For example, one time she saw a face on the back of a chair in a movie theater that told her something like carpool, and on her way to her dorm she was almost hit by a cab as she was walking through an intersection. She barely had time to recoil. Another time a chick was told by a face that had grown on the blackboard at uni that she was about to get fucked up, and a day later her friend ended up in the hospital with allergic swelling. My sister told me about other incidents, but I'm too lazy to recount them all now. There was a prediction about a stray dog attack, cashier's checks, and all that. It all came true. But according to a friend, more often than not, the faces were talking shit, not making predictions. The most cringe-worthy story I remember was the one where the fucker saw a face on her own knee, and the face told her that her eyes would turn to ink. Don't ask me what that meant, I was fucked up myself when I heard that. My sister says her friend stayed alive and physically healthy while she was in St. Petersburg, but her mental state had deteriorated a lot. I don't know, maybe she really was just a common schizophrenic. Lake out of town. Don't get your panties in a twist, Anons, I don't always have the time or energy to throw you another pasta. And I created this thread when I was drunk and at sea, so I'm clearly boring the cool stories every day. But I'll keep my commitment as best I can. Not far from our town at the 4th kilometer along the highway is a lake with a creek, where in the summertime those who don't like the city beach, the river current, and the cold water, polluted with factory waste, go for a swim. This is a popular place for parents with small rats, because the lake is deepened rather evenly, without cliffs, so there is little chance to accidentally drown your grub while swimming, and the lake is nice for swimming, not muddy, and sandy. I went swimming there myself a couple of times when I was a schoolboy, but now I don't really like swimming. I can't remember the last time I went to the beach. This creepypasta was told to me when I was a kid, by kids at school, then I heard it from adults too. Most likely it's just an urban legend, because the details are different every time, and there are no proofs that it really happened. But many people believe, like my dad and my sister, for example, who are 100% sure that this story is true. If not to bother with details, changing from time to time, the essence of the story is that in the mid-80s, at the end of summer, on a sunny day, which is rare for our region, a group of young people went on a picnic near this lake. They took a barbecue, meat, beer, rackets, and a badminton ball, a battery-operated tape recorder. In general, they went to have a civilized rest. They arrived by the mosque to the place and were glad that there were no children, which would have ruined a good rest. In general, they settled down, splashed around, started grilling shashlik, turned on music, everything went according to plan. At some point one of the heifers turned her friend's attention to the fact that from the other side of the lake, a group of 4 people came out of the woods and headed towards the shore too. Here I'll clarify that our lake is narrow, but long, and the most normal beach for swimming is located at one of its ends, located close to the dirt road. So from this point, the opposite shore was quite far away, and no detailed details of the 4 men's appearances could be seen. 2 of them seemed to be small in stature, like children, and the other 2 were taller. At first they did not pay attention to them, they had no monopoly on the lake, especially since the new group seemed to have decided to stay far away from them, so as not to disturb each other. The only thing that puzzled them a little was why the 4 of them had come out of the woods from the side where there was no road. About 10 minutes passed, and the young men noticed another oddity in the behavior of the newcomers. First of all, they had set up near the shore in the most uncomfortable place for swimming, where there was no sand but only grass and bushes, and at the bottom there was sand mixed with soil, so instead of normal bathing you got a smear of mud. Secondly, they didn't do a fucking thing, they just fucking sat there. Well, they just sat still and that was it. In one version, they were looking at the young people, in another, they were sitting in a circle and staring at each other. The chicks slowly began to feel goosebumps on their skin, while the guys did not really care, they were outnumbered anyway, so they could outnumber their opponents if necessary. And then all 4 of them got up and climbed into the water at the same time. They did not undress, nothing, they just entered the water, began to either walk on the bottom or swim forward, until they all disappeared under the water. The guys and girls who were watching them were waiting for them to swim out, but they never did. By the way, they usually add that there were no ripples in the lake from their entry into the water, the surface remained smooth. This is where everyone, including the daredevils, shit themselves on the opposite shore. They quickly gathered their belongings and ran back to town. Usually at the end of the story a deep thought is uttered, that as it turned out later, for all the history of the lake, up to that moment, only 4 people had drowned, 2 of them just children, but without the proofs, it looks only a beautiful fiction for the sake of the creepiness. Factory story. Anyway, I don't give a fuck if you want to merge your stories into the thread, I don't mind, especially since the title of the thread is appropriate for a hodgepodge, as I knew it would be, lol. I, for my part, will continue to leisurely pile on my own thread of stories. By the way, I just wrote pile and another story came to mind. There's a creepy, non-paranormal story, related to the chemical plant. I think it even really happened. It was in 1996. Well, another scheduled audit at the plant revealed large shortages of some chemical reagent, which was used in their production. Well, the control department began to monitor the employees, and in the end it turned out that at night a truck drives up, a couple of employees take out several barrels of this reagent from the warehouse, the storekeeper and the watchman were involved, load it on the truck, and it drives away. The local shop manager, who everyone knew was connected to a local organized crime group that was racketeering merchants, was in charge. The shop contacted the cops, who traced the truck's route. It went straight to the summer house of one of the leaders of the gang, surrounded by a high fence, with alarms, guards and sheepdogs inside. In short, no fucking way to get in. After a while, a truck would drive out and pour other, larger barrels into the river. They organized an operation, and during the next dump they secretly scooped up water from the place where the dumping had taken place before the barrels had completely dissipated. The forensic examination found the same reagent, mixed with various organic substances. In general, the cops understood everything at once, but the gang was then really influential, and for another year and a half they were still unable to catch them, despite all the evidence. And not only related to this investigation, there were many more cases on this gang. When in the end the shop was shut down, during the interrogation, as expected, the gangsters confessed that they dissolved the bodies of those kidnapped and murdered at that dacha in the reagent, which was in fact a strong acid, as a convenient way to get rid of the bodies. In Before Walter White, I shit myself when I was watching Breaking Bad. 20 people got dissolved like that. Weird night. Another story from my life. The creepiest one for me personally. I had one really weird night as a kid. You know, probably something in the style of false childhood memories that are discussed in the neighboring thread, but that's not really the case with me after all. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I did not go to school at that time, but soon after it happened, a cousin of my father's came to us from the village. In general, I must say that my mother's relatives are hereditary urban intellectuals. Even my grandfather, who saw the head under the bed, had 2 college degrees and had read everything by Marx, but my father, who had moved to the city, was a redneck, and all our relatives from his side, even more so. Anyway, his cousin needed to take care of some business in town, so he came to stay with us. At the time, the family lived in a 2-room apartment in a residential neighborhood: Dad, Mom, me, my sister, and my little brother. Adding another extra person did not add to the roominess. As a result, we rearranged the sleeping places, and my sister went to sleep in my parents' room, and the guest, his name was Vano, was put on the folding bed beside my bed. Note that my bed was parallel to the window, and if the curtains weren't drawn, I could stare at the sky from my bed, and in the summertime the curtains were often left open at night. Alright, here's the story. So, in the evening we went to bed at the same time as Vano, and he fell asleep quickly, but I was unaccustomed to having a strange guy snoring next to me, and I could not fall asleep for a long time. I was tossing and turning for, like, 2 hours, and then I kind of fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I was in some real fucked up shit, and my memories are coming back in spurts, like separate scenes from a movie. I'll list them as I remember them. Scene 1. I wake up at night, it's still pretty bright outside, it's summer, and I see 2 clouds that are unusually bright red, as if they were being illuminated from below. Vano snores. Scene 2. I wake up again, everything is the same, only one of those red clouds has moved away, greatly increasing the distance from the other cloud. Scene 3. I woke up because I could hear some low humming, and as if the floor were vibrating. I can compare it to such a small vibration when a concert sound system in the neighboring apartment was blasting. The lagging cloud pulled up to the one that was running away from it, but both were somehow blurred and out of shape. But the color is the same bright red, like rust. For some fucked up reason, I'm happy that the lagging cloud is catching up with its neighbor and will apparently soon outrun it. Scene 4. I come to my senses in the kitchen. I stand at the window and stare at the very large full moon. The hum and vibrations continue, and the house is quiet. I drink some water and go back to my room. Vano's gone, and, interestingly enough, his fucking cot's not even there. I lie down on my bed and see that the 2 clouds have begun to merge with each other. Scene 5. I come to my senses in the fucking street. Wearing only my underwear, which is what I actually go to bed in, not even shoes. No panic, nothing at all. I stand alone in the yard of our house, looking up at the sky. There's the same full moon and some kind of flying thing, blinding me with a very bright bluish light right in my eyes. I can't make out the shape of the fucker because I'm blinded. The strange clouds are no longer visible. The light seems to pulsate, and at some point I realize the surrealness of the situation and I just go into a wild terror. I jumped into the stairwell at a fantastic speed and ran up to the 5th floor. Because of my blindness I kept bumping into the walls. I pressed the bell. I remember nothing else. Scene 6. I wake up on the bed all sweaty. Vano snores nearby. I can't see the red clouds in the window. I calm down and go back to sleep. But the most horrible experience of my fucking life was in the morning, when I got out of bed and saw the dry dirt on my heels, as if I had been walking in the yard at night. Told my mom about the dream, showed my feet, she took it seriously but didn't panic. Later, when I grew up, my whole family wondered what had happened, but we didn't understand a fucking thing. The door was locked, and the key was in the same place on the refrigerator where we always put it. Theoretically, of course, it was possible that I had temporarily lost my fucking mind and had gone out into the yard at night, and then secretly returned and put the key back, but there were no dirty marks on the floor, and they would have still remained, given the degree of dirt on my heels. Vano said he hadn't woken up in the night, hadn't gone anywhere, and certainly hadn't taken the cot with him, but he said he slept very badly, having nightmares all night. My father, mother, and sister did not notice anything unusual during the night, they did not see anything out of the window, they did not hear any humming. By the way, after that for about a couple of years I sometimes had a strange seizure like an epileptic seizure, when my limbs twitched and my brain shut down, although before that I had never suffered from anything like that. I even went to the doctor. But it went away on its own, or maybe the doctor helped, and now I don't suffer from this kind of shit. Whirlwind. I'm not drunk, I'm just busy, so I don't have time to post. Today is another one of my childhood stories. I was in the 9th grade at the time, so I was about 15. It was spring, in March or April. After hanging out with friends on the street in the afternoon, I went home closer to dinner. I walked through a park, no, not the one with the statue of Lenin, but closer to the center of the city. In the spring, we often have little whirlwinds in the city, picking up all kinds of trash. I think it's like that in every city. And so I go and I see that on the ground a little ways away from me, one of these whirlwinds is circling, except it's not quite normal, but rather sort of misshapen, about the height of my current smartphone. The dust particles are tightly circling together, and it looks pretty nice and all embossed. In general. Well, I did not think long and ran up and gave it a kick. Thought that the vortex would collapse, but it was just the opposite. It literally, within a couple of seconds, grew so quickly that it was taller than me. Right before my eyes all the last year's leaves and the top layer of earth lifted from the ground. In short, I didn't have time to fucking understand, and so it turned out that I was almost at the epicenter of this fucking thing, and I was knocked around so much by the vortex that I really almost fell off my feet. I felt a little uncomfortable at the time, especially since I had heard a story somewhere in my childhood that you shouldn't enter whirlwinds, because they were spirits walking around, etc., so typical paganism. Anyway, after spitting out all the grains of sand and other shit that the vortex had managed to shovel into my mouth in that couple of seconds, I ran, and the fucking vortex started chasing me. I don't know if it's just the laws of physics that make the vortex follow the air movement caused by my body, but the bastard 3-meter tornado kept up with me all the way out of the park. By the way, there were other bystanders watching me, which probably looked like a horror movie, or comedy for that matter. Then it somehow dissipated on its own, quickly too, literally in a couple of seconds, and I went home to wash my pants. I don't know what the hell it was, or if it was just a coincidence, but I haven't really tried to get into whirlwinds since then. By the way, for some reason, I don't think that should happen to just me. If this has happened to other Anons as well, please confirm in the thread, I'll know I'm not the only one. Bus stop. Sup, Snatch, OP is back. As promised, I'm throwing in 2 more stories. We have a little neighborhood called Budget, and it has a bus stop called Retirement House. I myself don't go there very often, because there's no reason to, and I live in the opposite part of town, but of course I've driven by it a few times. The block is really depressing even against the general bleakness of our small town, mostly wooden buildings which should have been demolished long ago, some private homes with rotten fences, asphalt, of course not, and even there some foreign cultists built up a church in the 90s, by the way. We still have them, I do not know who goes to them anyway. So, there is an urban legend about this retirement house bus stop. They say that very strange people were often seen in its vicinity at one time, between about the 70s and the late 80s. There was only one bus route there, so those who were waiting, say, in the evenings for a bus, had to stand for a long time. And then people at the bus stops would see, let's say, a man without both arms, with his sleeves hanging down, walking by. It's kind of like that, unlucky for a guy, he's an invalid. The only thing is that 146% of our town, at least at the time, didn't have any handicapped people like that. The town wasn't that big, he would have been often seen and at least someone would have identified him, but no. And this was not an isolated incident. Another person was hanging out on that street on an autumn evening, smoking, and a midget walks by. And not some nice-looking Tyrion Lannister, but with a terribly fucked up face, as if all the skin on his face had been pulled off into one side. Naturally, the man was freaking out, and then the next few days he started making inquiries, and the whole town heard rumors about him, but no, we don't have such a dwarf, no one knows about him. And a girl saw a guy there with his head burnt off. I mean really, freshly burned, his hair is all smoky, there's soot and burns, but he's walking along, hands in his pockets, almost whistling a tune. By the way, just now I was writing and realized that in none of the retellings of this urban legend, anything is said about the clothes of those strange types, so at least their clothes were normal, well, by the standards of the Soviet Union. The girl also laid down her bricks, did not turn to the man, and he passed by. And there were many such cases. They saw a man 2.5 meters tall, and a woman with such a terrifying face that he saw ran away, and a half-naked fat boy weighing about 150 kilograms. All within a radius of a couple of 100 meters from one stop. No one else in the city had seen this shit show. And lastly, the most disturbing thing of all. This story is attributed to the bus driver. He took the last trip of the evening, the bus was empty, because there were only 2 stops from the terminus. No one from the retirement house got on, but he stopped there anyway. Maybe he was doing something of his own accord, taking advantage of the stop. He was about to move, but then into the light of the headlights came, or rather crawled into, some lowly-looking 15-year-old. That was just crawling along the road like a worm. She did not even use her hands, although she had both hands and feet. The driver was fucked up, and when he came to his senses, he ran out to her, thinking maybe she was sick or paralyzed. He asked her what was wrong, and she looked at him and opened her mouth. The driver only now noticed that she was bleeding around her mouth. So she opens her mouth, moans, and there's not one tooth in her mouth, all knocked out or ripped out, and she's bleeding. The driver was totally freaked out. He bent down automatically, wanted to at least help her up, and then he got really freaked out. Up close it turned out that it wasn't a fucking loli, it was a man. That is, a man who looked nothing like a woman, but a man with long hair, even though he had seen a girl 5 seconds before. He grabbed the driver's clothes and started pulling him toward himself. He was stubborn, but the man was strong. He almost knocked him down, and he laughed soundlessly with his toothless mouth, and his eyes were wild and scary. In short, the driver barely got away from him, and even that was only because his shirt was torn and a part of it was left in the hands of this lowly man. When he saw that the man was a lowly with long blonde hair again, the driver quickly got on the bus, backed up, and drove the fuck away. I don't know if he told the police or if he did it in secrecy at home, but a week later, the whole city knew about a new incident at Budget. Nothing has happened there for a long time now. In the early 90s all the damn things stopped in that area. But still, as they say, the residue remained, and the urban legend is still in circulation. Personally, I can't be dragged to the fucking retirement house alone in the dark. Blood River. And since I've written our local urban legend here, I'll continue in the same vein. This one's really old, from the late 30s on. Mom says that when she was young, she personally communicated with people who witnessed it. Who fucking knows, maybe they still are there. They are like up to 80 years old, it is quite possible, but I have not met these people, and did not look for them, and my grandparents either did not live here then, grandparents on my father's side, my grandfather on my mother's side, or have not yet been born, my grandmother on my mother's side. Bottom line. On a summer night, a scarlet glow appeared in the sky, stretching from north to south. Those who stayed awake and went out into the yard to see it could distinguish it very clearly. At first it was just a vague pink color, then after a while it became sharper, darker, somehow more textured, or something. And then everyone saw the fucking thing turn into a genuine red river or stream that flowed across the sky. I mean, there was a big current with small currents, all sorts of swirling, crawling, etc. People were in a fucking frenzy, a lot of people there were crossing themselves, reading prayers, thinking that it was the end of the world or some other shit, and not giving a fuck that Comrade Stalin wouldn't pat their heads for that. Absolutely everyone perceived the vision as a river of blood, not some abstract optical effect. For about 3 hours, that's if I didn't fuck up, I just forgot exactly how long I was told, this river flowed from north to south. There was no sound, the stars were in place, well that's except for the ones the river itself didn't block. Then it began to fade, the current became just a scarlet glow again, and soon dissipated. The sober people then assumed that it was either some rare atmospheric phenomenon, marsh gas reflected from Venus, or our military was testing some new wonder waffle. It seemed reasonable at the time, progress, and all that. But in the end no one found out what it was. So there you go. And yes, I forgot to add that in hindsight, after the beginning of World War II, all believers, and mystics of course, decided that it was a foreshadowing of the coming bloody war. Hi Peter. Sup creepers. I'm still on the road, today I'm in DS, laying in a hotel near Izmailovsky Park, waiting for my flight, so I'll make a quick short story. The story was told by my sister. When she was at school, she had a classmate whose name was Petya. She said he got straight A's and was a pretty quiet, upright boy. He rarely went out drinking with their group, and if he did, he didn't drink, but huddled in the corners of the hangout. He and my sister had been friends since 8th grade. I don't know the circumstances, but from her tone of voice I'm guessing that my sister never gave that jerk a chance, and she friend-zoned him hard. But that's not the point. This Petya came back from summer vacation with a scar on his head, near his temple. When I asked him about it, he told me that he and his father had been driving somewhere out of town and had overturned in a van. No one died, but Petya had a good blow to the head, a concussion, and a scar. I don't think there were any consequences, and I don't know if this trauma is related to what happened next, but my sister says that he blamed himself for the trauma. By the beginning of the second quarter, Petya started complaining to my sister about his periodically fucked up state. Like he was sitting there and all of a sudden it was like he was in a movie, and he was like a spectator and fucked up. I think his parents took him to the doctors. He also used to tell my sister really fucking weird stories about his dreams. I mean, he didn't tell me much about specific dreams, or my sister was too lazy to retell them to me, but the point is that he said that in his dreams he receives some instructions of varying degrees of fucked upness. For example, go to such and such a street, stand there, count off so many posts along the road, then turn left, go to the forest and count off some trees there, and there will be the right place. At the same time, after waking up, Petya understood that it was a dream. He had dreamt it up and it was all bullshit, but he could not forget the instructions. They were going around in his head for a day or even more, but then they were forgotten all the same. And now for the main thing. Neither Petya nor my sister paid much attention to these movie states and instructions from dreams. They thought it was a brain glitch after the concussion, and the doctors told him that it happens, like don't pay attention, it's bullshit. But when Petya told some acquaintance of his about what was happening to him, he got the idea and encouraged Petya to carry out one of the instructions that was fresh at the time. My sister did not remember exactly the sequence of steps Petya was telling her on the way, but the final steps consisted in counting up and doorways from the point where he was at that moment near the house, and more specifically, not houses. If, for example, the house ended at number 5, then you go to the next house and count from 6 onwards, and so on up to n. My sister also said that the instructions came with a tricky rule about how exactly to pick the next house if there were more than one, but that's details. In short, the two of them walked up and down the staircase and looked at the right wall on the right floor, everything according to the instructions from the dream, and it turned out that there was a big black marker picture of a grinning devil with the signature, "Hello Peter." Petya himself said that he had never been in this block before, and his friend could not set it up, because he remembered the instructions during the hike and had never told anyone before. So as soon as he saw the devil seemed so fucking familiar to him, like deja vu, and then he fell back into cinematic mode and sort of realized that he had done everything right, some plan had been fulfilled, and everything was normal. He was explaining to my sister later, like he was looking at a movie script and realized with pleasure that the actors had played everything exactly according to the script. Well done. Then he woke up and got all freaked the fuck out, and Petya shit himself because of that shit. According to my sister, after that Petya no longer tried to follow instructions from dreams. And even if he did not tell her. I don't know what happened to him after that, but my sister says he eventually stopped complaining about the dreams, finished school normally, got his diploma, and they never saw each other again. There you go. By the way, one of the instructions, about going to the woods, I wrote above, led to the very same woods where everyone hangs themselves. Well, this is just a coincidence, is unlikely to mean anything. But it is necessary to bring up the creepiness. The outpatient clinic. Okay, I think I still have time, so I got a beer and I'm writing another story. There's an old hospital in the east of our little town. Now it is abandoned, because in the 2000s they built a new modern complex in the center of the city. The old hospital had 3 rooms, an outpatient clinic, an inpatient clinic, and something like a storehouse. One of my aunts worked there as a midwife, and she told us that the outpatient clinic building was considered troubling by the nurses. This building is the oldest of the whole complex. It was built around the time of the Revolution, then repaired many times. For a while it was the main hospital of the city, and, accordingly, a lot of people died there. I have seen this outpatient clinic, although I have not been inside. It is quite small, 2-story. According to my aunt, the staff on duty at night constantly heard some footsteps, creaks, sighs, voices in the rooms, and my aunt herself allegedly personally heard someone in the next residence room walking and loudly beating on the radiators, although I don't know why the fuck the ghost needed to do that. From memory, here are some of the incidents the hospital staff told each other. A female intern shit herself when she saw a dark, 2-meter-tall silhouette staring at her from the other side through the frosted glass on the door at night while she was on duty. It stood perfectly still for about half an hour, then disappeared. One of the other young interns, or something, who was snoozing in the outpatient clinic at night, dreamed that an old lady with a pile of firewood appeared through the front door, bumped into him on the way while trying to go into the next room and threatened him with her fist, like, "Move aside, you're in the way." My aunt says the interesting thing is that before the building was equipped with electricity, there was a wood-burning stove in the very next room, which of course, the intern didn't know about. More than once at night they saw silhouettes of people wandering around the rooms of the building in the windows when they shouldn't be there. According to my aunt, in the treatment room in that outpatient clinic the temperature jumps unexplainedly, although the room is connected to the others and the walls and windows are well insulated. Sometimes it got really fucking cold in 5 minutes, this was in summer. Sometimes, on the contrary, everyone started sweating like hogs, while in other rooms, 5 meters away, everything was normal. In general, many employees and patients said that they slept very fucking badly in the outpatient clinic, having nightmares. A couple of times they noticed poltergeist, chairs moving, vials falling off shelves, lights turning on and off. Although, this is all in the form of legends, my aunt did not know who personally saw this. And then there was the last incident, which my aunt was a witness to. They brought a 5 to 6-year-old child. They were sitting in the hall on the second floor and were waiting for the reception. The mother went away for a minute, came back, the child was gone. She raised the alarm, everyone started looking, none of the patients or doctors saw anything, so they called the cops. But even before they got there, the child was found in a utility room on the first floor that had a latch on the top of the door where he couldn't reach. When asked, "Are you fucking nuts? What are you doing there?" he said some tall red-headed woman had brought him there, opened the door and told him to sit quietly until she came back for him. So he stayed quiet until they opened the back room. It was unclear who the redhead was. There was no tall redhead among the medics, no patients in the building, or at least the little twerp didn't identify anyone as the redhead. Maybe it was some kind of fucked up kidnapping attempt, and the kidnapper then quietly got the fuck out, but it was still strange, the kind of stealthy way the redhead had operated in, that she had led the child completely unnoticed by anyone from one end of the second floor to the other end of the first floor. Moreover, to the side that was as far away from the exit as possible. In short, no one understood anything. Among themselves, my aunt and other colleagues blamed it on a rambunctious ghost. A maniac in my apartment building. Sup/SN. There will only be one story today, because I just got off a flight to my home today and came to my panopticon, jet lag, biorhythm disruption, all that, my head is not very good. I'm going to post a story here and go straight to bed. No mysticism today, but for me it's pretty fucking creepy. The thing is, for a while there was a maniac living in the same entranceway as me, not in Panop, but in the house where my parents live, and I lived when I was a kid. If you Google it, you might even find some articles about him. His work was done in the mid-90s, he was arrested in 1998, so it's understandable that at such a tender age I couldn't remember him. But he lived 2 floors below us in a one-room apartment, where he used to cut up his victims. My mother told me that for a while the apartment was completely empty, and people were afraid to live and sleep in the same place where not so long ago he was killing and eating women. Then, when the story was forgotten, they were brave enough. No one ever complained about ghosts or restless souls of the victims, it's just like an ordinary apartment. The maniac was not the most epic, he only killed 2 people, got caught epically on the 3rd, and that's how they got him. He had a college degree, in the early 90s, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union had lost his job and was plunged into deep poverty, making a living on small jobs such as salesman in shops. He was not married, but they say that after financial problems he was ditched by his cohabitant chick. Well, the guy went crazy because of all this, or maybe he was sick before all this. The scheme was as follows: he hung around all kinds of parks and cinemas in the evenings, under the pretext that he had a fucking great home theater, which he really had. He lured the fucking girls to his place. He did not really care about the age of the victims. The first victim was a young student. The second was a 40-something MILF. Then while watching a movie he suddenly came up behind them and smashed their heads with a hammer, cut the meat off, boiled it and ate it. He would dismember the bodies in the bathroom and carry them out in trash bags, take them to the countryside, and bury them there. When they arrested him and asked why the fuck he ate the victims, he said he was inspired by the movie Silence of the Lambs. He himself was said to be quite intelligent, and to be a good liar, so you could almost say he was a genius, and he did not really like the meat in itself. He even threw up. But he enjoyed it purely as a symbol. He did not try to fuck the chicks. For that, he had other women and prostitutes with whom he behaved normally. With the third potential victim, a genuine Benny Hill situation had happened. She spotted him as he was coming up with a hammer and started running away. He chased her first through the house, then through the driveway, banged the hammer wherever he could. He even broke her toe and bruised her back. She screamed all the way down the stairs. Of course the neighbors jumped out and grabbed the guy with the hammer, called the cops, and that was the end of Hannibal Lecter's career. Maybe he would have somehow managed to get out of it, although I doubt it, but during the search they found several bones from his previous victims, which he had kept as a keepsake, and after that it was pointless to deny it. When I was a teenager, I used to watch a lot of maniacs like Chikatilo, Pikishkin, Spisovtsev, etc. I used to watch Criminal Russia and I was incredibly moved by the idea that this kind of cruelty was going on in my apartment, although before that I had never thought about this fact. To be brave, I coaxed my friend to an incredibly epic undertaking, to ring the doorbell of that very apartment and, during the dialogue with the tenant, to look into the insides of the maniac's apartment. The maniac didn't live there at the time. The door was opened by a man in his 50s, and we started asking him if Kliman Sergeyevich lived there. He was the head of our building. He lived on another floor, like there were problems with the plumbing in the apartment. The man explained that Kliman Sergeyevich lived in so-and-so apartment, to go there so-and-so, and closed the door. During this time we saw only the hallway and a little part of the living room through the open door between the hallway and the living room. At the time, for some reason we did not think that the new tenant was 146% likely to have redecorated the whole interior for himself, and we assumed that the fucking floral chintz curtains by the coat rack, the green rug and the lacquered wooden stool in front were the paraphernalia of the real maniac, which he used every day and probably scrubbed the girls' blood off them. It's funny now, but back then, when I remembered those things, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. No, I did not jerk off to them, don't think so, but my adrenaline was going a little high, you know. 2 meetings. Oh, Anons, what have I got going on here? It's fucked up. The Sunday before last my friends invited me on a fishing trip, so I went with them instead of CAPTCHA 2 checking and writing the promised stories for you. There of course I drank, and though I haven't bathed for ages, I splashed near the shore like a fool, and before that I sniffled a little. I caught a cold in Moscow with its permanent thunderstorms. As a result I was on sick leave last week, so I was not so good in my health, surfing mostly from my vidrophone, so I was not able to write my story, and I didn't really want to. Now I seem to be back to normal. If the doctor says today that I am healthy, tomorrow I will go to work. Never swim if you have even a little cold, especially in the river. Today a story from my mom, or rather her aunt, but she was telling it to my mom, and she was retelling it to me. It's hard to describe, but you get the idea. Mom's aunt, her name was Elena. In Soviet times she worked as a saleswoman in a department store, and she had a husband, a skier, who at first was a very good athlete and was included in all the national teams, but by the age of 40 he was a real drunk. They had 4 children, 3 of whom are still alive today, that I see at all sorts of family gatherings. Anyway, the story concerns this very skiing husband, or rather, his death. He died of throat cancer, had burned up in a couple of years, said to have been in a lot of pain. After his death, the aunt almost drank herself to death with 4 children, but her relatives helped her. Anyway, the point is that the aunt told my mother and other relatives that she had seen the same person twice before her husband's death, and the first time was a couple of years before her husband's illness was even found, and the second time was a month before he died. But she doubted that it was a real person. The first time Elena saw the man was in the front yard of her house. She was just going out to run some errands, and the man was standing at the porch and started talking to her. He was speaking very incomprehensibly, only individual words were distinguishable, and then the aunt realized that it was not like an unintelligible babble of a drunken man. The words that were heard very clearly, and the rest were as if they flew out of her memory. Anyway, the aunt heard him call her husband's name and freaked out, because she thought it was another drinking buddy coming to get her husband out to get him drunk. She replied rather rudely in the style of, "My husband is not at home right now, and anyway, I am sick and tired of your alcoholic stories, one more fucking great than the next, so go fuck yourself." She is a woman in general, she is harsh. He said something else, she remembered 2 words, just came, she did not understand what this meant, and walked past the alcoholic boozer. She took a couple of steps, stopped and turned to him, and he was gone, although he could not have gone anywhere, even if he ran at the speed of Usain Bolt. That's when my aunt got the goosebumps. It is interesting that later, when she recalled the incident, she realized that she could not say anything definite about his face or his clothes, a middle-aged man in ordinary dark clothes, but specific details seemed to slip her mind, though my mother told me that this could be explained by the fact that my aunt had vision of -3, and she did not wear glasses. As I said, soon afterwards it became clear that her husband was very ill, and he eventually became totally ill. The second time Elena saw the same man outside the school where she was picking up her younger daughter, who was in elementary school at the time. He was standing there by the gate, and this time she recognized him at once, though she could not remember his exact description. It was daytime, there were people and children around, so it would have been strange to run away, so her aunt walked up to the gate, looking at the man at the gate. He began to say something again, and again his words seemed to go in one ear and out the other. Her aunt remembered that it was about her husband again, and that he was going to die soon. She remembered very vividly the fragments of phrases, "Don't be afraid," and "they sent her." The aunt was really creeped out and quickly walked past the strange man, headed for the school entrance, didn't even look back, so it remained unclear whether the man had disappeared this time or not. Actually, soon the husband really died, and what the expression "sent her" meant, later the whole family pondered, but did not come to a specific conclusion. My mother's father, yes, the grandfather from the Barracks, for example, thought that the woman had either made it all up, or had mistaken 2 different real people for one messenger because of her blindness and suggestibility. Such is the story. Country summer. Snatch, I'm back. Starting tomorrow I'm on vacation until the end of January, so I should have some free time in the coming days. I'm going to try to post stories regularly for the rest of the vacation. For breakfast, here's another one of my sister's cool ones, one of the very first. When she was little, she was usually floated off to her paternal grandparents' village for the summer. The village is 30 kilometers from the city, now slowly dying out, but then, they say, it was still quite crowded. I also went there a couple of times as a kid, but I did not like it, and as soon as I went to school, I strongly refused to go there, instead registered for any summer camps at our school. I was a homebody and an unsociable person from my childhood, and when I first came to the village at the age of 5, I was nearly mauled by my neighbor's huge Doberman, who was allowed to breed them at that time. There was no control over the dog, and he pawed me to the ground and held me there while the owner yelled from across the street, "Alton, you can't. Come here. I don't know how I didn't shit my pants then. Now I sometimes go there very rarely, just for business. Anyway, my sister is still a preschooler, I'm only in the beginning of development, and she is playing in the sandbox near our grandparents' house during the day. By the way, the sandbox is still there, specially built for her. With her were two more, a neighbor's boy and a girl. The boy was younger, the girl was older. Not far away on a rope hung bed sheets and all sorts of clothes washed by my grandmother to dry, and right behind the rope was the barn. It is sunny, bright, warm. Sister is playing and sees some unknown woman approaching from the side of the house and walking through the clothes hanging out to the barn. And the barn, it must be said, adjoins a solid fence, and the entrance to the barn is on the opposite side. In short, the woman stupidly headed for the dead end. My sister waited for her to climb back out, but she never showed from behind the sheets. Then she got up, peeked behind her hanging clothes, no one there. Gone. The most interesting thing is that the boy, who was playing with his sister, also saw the woman pass, but the girl said no one was there. In fact, for me, it's a bit like that incident with me and the strange girl at my friend's apartment. Later that summer there was another incident. In addition to the barn, there is a summer shed in the yard and a rustic latrine 10 paces away. Both also adjoin the fence, and it turns out that between the barn and the toilet there is something like a recess. So, one evening my sister went to the toilet and, approaching from the side of the barn, she distinctly heard someone laughing in that recess, as if trying to restrain themselves, but could not. It was already twilight, and my sister felt a little creeped out. She stopped and listened, the laughter continued, and then began to laugh as if two different voices were laughing. Sister then went sideways to the center of the yard far enough and from there went around the barn, so that if anything happened she could rush straight to the house. As she went around, the laughter continued, but as soon as she got far enough away to see the alcove, it stopped. Naturally, there was no one in the alcove. My sister says she's 200% sure the laughter wasn't behind the fence, it was right around the corner of the barn. There was also a village incident, but that was another year. My sister went to the village again, and one night she dreamed that she woke up and saw that some red-faced dwarf came out of the stove and pissed in a bucket that stood next to the stove, and pissed blood, almost to the brim. And then either the next day or 2 days later, a steer at Grandma and Grandpa's house snapped his neck trying to jump over some fence in the meadow. My grandfather had to let it go for meat, and in the evening my sister saw him bring the bucket, the inner walls of which were red with blood, and rinse it out in the yard by the basin. In fact, it was after this that my sister began to believe in her witchcraft. She told me everything very convincingly, and when I was a kid I also strongly believed that she was a psychic, but her attempts to predict, summon, etc. in my presence always failed. How we rolled a saucer. By the way, now that it's Christmas Eve, I had one incident where I and my cousin, not that cousin, rolled a saucer in the winter at the apartment when we were both students. Not to be confused with my sister, I will call her Anya. The incident was not very creepy, and not really cryptic at all, but it was unpleasant for both of us. My cousin lived alone then, and I sometimes dropped in on her because she had the internet and a printer, and I had to download my reports to write and type. I think it was 2005, I had no internet at home, it was expensive and inconvenient to go to an internet cafe, and my cousin was a super major at the time and she let me sit, download, and print everything I needed without restrictions. So in the evening I came in, plugged into the internet, and we got to talking about Christmas Eve and fortune telling. Anya said she had been in a saucer roll a couple of times and knew how to do it. I started encouraging her to roll the saucer and show me the process, and she agreed. In general, the idea of rolling a saucer together is pretty fucked up, because it's kind of a big fucking group, but that didn't bother us. We taped together 4 sheets of A4 paper to get something like poster paper, made a crooked circle on it, painted the alphabet, numbers, signs, inscribed greetings, goodbye, yes, no in the corners, lit a candle, scorched the saucer on the candle, made an arrow on it, turned off the light, placed both our index fingers on it, and off we went. The first 2 attempts were fucked up. First we called in Dostoevsky and then somebody else, I don't remember. The saucer didn't move, and if it did, it was because our fingers were twitching. Then we decided to call someone we knew who was dead, and her father had died of tuberculosis when she was a little girl, so we decided to call him. We read out an invitation in the style of username, your daughter wants to talk to you, come, and soon the saucer began to move. Actually, guys, I was really surprised when this shit actually worked. I mean, of course, everything can be explained by subconscious movements that you are not aware of, but when there are only 2 people moving, and you watch carefully and are sure that neither of you specifically pushes the saucer in any direction, but it starts to really jump like crazy from letter to letter and produce meaningful phrases, and it is dark around, only the candle is lit, it really inspires mysterious fear. Anya started asking all kinds of bullshit, like how is my father in the other world, how old will she be when she gets married, what is the name of her fiancé, etc. But this fucking saucer did not give a fuck about her questions and only constructed all kinds of obscene sentences, like, when will I get pregnant and Anya is a cunt not getting married, I think that was the wording. Then I started asking questions, like what is the meaning of life, what is in store for us in the coming year, but the saucer still kept referring to Anya, starting each answer with her name, and started asking counter questions like do you want a dick in your asshole? Can you wank your dick off? I don't remember the exact wording, my cousin was obviously very embarrassed, and I cannot tell you how embarrassed I was, it was just bad, because I had a sort of rational opinion that we were actually unconsciously moving the saucer and pushing it in the right directions, which meant that I had been asking all these fucking questions to my cousin, she would not be insulting herself. I swear I had nothing like that in my mind at the time, purely academic interest in the saucer rolling and getting the fuck away from watching the saucer move. Anyway, we decided to wrap up the shop. Anya said something like, thanks, we've learned everything we need to know, now goodbye. The saucer was supposed to move to the goodbye corner, but it quickly went to no. We didn't ask any questions for a while, but the saucer kept crawling on the page, making all sorts of profanity-filled expressions, I remember, Dungbuck, and Orenburg fuck. Why Orenburg? I don't know, we have nothing to do with that city. For those who don't know, you can't just take your finger off the saucer, it's believed that in this case the spirit can stay in the house. Fucked by this turn of events, Anya said that if the spirit does not leave, then you have to call him by name and ask him to leave. She said, Father name, I'm asking you to leave, to which the saucer blurted out, I'm not Father name. Then I asked, then what's your name, and was answered with what seemed to me to be a cosmically cryptic word, Soluya. Anya was frightened by this word too, but still she said something like Soluya, I'm really asking you to go back to where you came from, goodbye, and the saucer finally rolled back to the goodbye corner, and we withdrew our fingers and switched on the light. That's the kind of Ouija board seance we had. Then we were both uncomfortable for a while. Well, that word still gives me the creeps. Meteorite. And lastly, a micro story with no crypto at all, our local urban legend. A lot of people here believe that in the 17th or 18th century a meteorite fell into the woods not far from town. Not as epic a giant as the Tunguska, otherwise all wildlife in the area would probably go crazy for a long time, more like the Chelyabinsk meteorite. I specifically googled meteorites, it seems that there is no documented meteorite fall in our area, so one could take this as a fantasy of locals and bullshit, but still those were rather dark times, nobody had car DVRs and iPhones, and the authorities probably did not give a damn from a high bell. On rumors about a flash in the sky in Mukosransk, especially if there was no physical damage from it. And according to the legend, there really wasn't much damage. The city was then just beginning to sprawl. Each storyteller's version varies by 146%, but it looks like there was a flash, something big and shiny fell from the sky, flying from the sea toward the taiga, then the earth trembled, all the dishes in the houses began to rattle. That was the end of it. I don't know why I'm telling this here, it's no big deal, but I promised at the beginning to tell local urban stories, and 99% of the stories are only about the adventures of my relatives and me. So let it be for a change. Also, as a proof, I can tell you that it's believed that a lot of the trees around our town have developmental anomalies, like they have fewer branches and leaves growing on their tops than they normally do. I don't know if it has anything to do with the meteorite, but I've heard the theory that it's because that boulder kind of scorched and melted the tops when it fell. But I don't think those trees from 300 years ago are still growing today. However, I'm not a botanist. Crying in the wall. Today I'm going to relay my mother's story. No mysticism ever happened to her, but she recounted a couple of incidents that happened to people she knew. In short, when she was a child, she had a school friend, Octobrina. She lived in a 5-story building near the biggest movie theater in our city. Octobrina had a little brother who was just a little pussy, just learning to speak. And Octobrina, who often stayed in the apartment alone with her little brother to look after him in her parents' absence, began to feel uneasy that he was constantly climbing to the wall in the living room, where the TV was. His reason for this was that someone was supposedly crying there. Octobrina herself heard nothing, but her brother's repeated stories about crying in the wall and his tantrums made her cringe, especially if it was in the evening and her parents had not yet returned home. It happened quite often. When Mom would go to their house, Octobrina would show her the exact spot where her brother heard crying. There was a table, a TV set and a stabilizer, a fucking thing that was connected to the TV set, like a Soviet UPS. I remember we had one of those when we were kids, a small free space and a wall behind the table. Of course, my mother herself didn't hear anything, and Octobrina's brother didn't suffer from the crying bullshit during her visits. In short, Mom did not pay much attention to this, but about a month after Octobrina's fucking cries started, even less than a month, she suddenly stopped going to school. Mom, of course, went to her friend's house, but her dad opened the door and told her that Octobrina was suddenly sick, and he didn't specify what it was. My mother asked what hospital she had to go to visit her, but he said that she had been taken to our regional center, like sorry, she could not visit her. At the same time Mom remembered later that if usually when the doorbell rang the little boy immediately ran into the hallway to show off, unless he was asleep, and my mom came to Octobrina right after school. At this time the little one was not in the habit of sleeping, but this time he was not in the hallway, and his stomping on the floor and voice was not heard. That is, most likely, not only Octobrina, but her brother as well, were not in the apartment. In short, my mother left upset and decided to come back on the weekend to see how her friend was doing. And when she came back, she kissed the locked door. No one opened it. She went a few more times, but each time it was locked. The apartment had obviously been evicted. Then she bailed. What could she do in such a situation? There were no social networks, mobile phones, or even landline phones in those days, so the connection with Octobrina was cut off at this point. The next time she stopped by Octobrina's house after some considerable time, when purely by chance she passed by, what if they came back? But there was already someone there, some strange woman, apparently the new landlady or tenant. Mom was embarrassed to talk to an unfamiliar adult and just left. Naturally, my mother has no proof that Octobrina's illness was connected with her brother's sonic hallucinations, but in general the whole story with her friend's incomprehensible unspecified illness, the absence of the little one in the apartment, and the urgent departure seemed rather suspicious to her, and to me, too, while retelling it, at once. And Octobrina, as my mother says, before the illness was really scared of the whole fucking crying thing, all her conversations revolved around it. School on Bones. Has everyone in this thread seen horror movies whose plot revolves around a house built on a fucking Indian cemetery, and laughed at the stupidity of the home builders who build houses right on the cemetery? You're gonna laugh, but there's a school number 3 in our town that was built in a cemetery. And this is a fact, not a school story, which high school kids like to scare the little ones with. Everyone knows that there really used to be an old pre-revolutionary cemetery, which was completely torn down in the 50s after the war, and a new school was built. The old-timers talk about how they saw how they bulldozed the ground there with bones and rotten boards. Until the 80s, as my grandfather and mother used to say, sometimes 1 or 2 knuckles, pieces of skulls, etc. would accidentally pop up from the ground in the schoolyard. Naturally, on the backdrop of such a fucked up story, there were legends about the ghosts of the 3rd school. I didn't go there myself, so I don't know what the situation is like, but the ghost stories about the school are, to be honest, of the 7th grade B level, so I doubt anything really happens there, although I don't know, the building really stands on shittily cleared graves, after all. I'll tell you what I've heard, which is a little better than the skeleton in the biology lab comes out of the closet at night level. Yes, I've heard such a story, too. They say, I haven't seen it myself, that in the school's gymnasium there is a large portrait of the school's founder hanging on the wall. In the gym, because he was some kind of honored master of sports. And this portrait falls down regularly, at least once every couple of years, even though it's been nailed down over the years. Even when it was nailed down, someone pulled the portrait out one night and it ended up on the floor in the morning. The official version is that the dead are taking revenge on the image of the man who had once decided to build a school here and disturb their peace. In the locked music room, sometimes in the evenings and at night, someone plays the piano, and quite mediocrely, just a cacophony of sounds. Sort of spruced up repeatedly by security guards, students, and teachers, even in the 2000s and the 10s. They repeatedly tried to make a garden area in the schoolyard, but each time there was an incomprehensible fiasco. All the plantings, trees, and even potted flower beds withered away in a matter of days and months. A geography teacher in the 90s got fucked up in class and started strangling a student. The teacher is in a mental institution, the girl's throat was badly damaged. In the mid-1990s, a physicist fucked up and threw himself off the 3rd floor, there were no higher floors. He was hurt, but alive and even mentally healthy, and he could not explain why he threw his ass out and what had gotten into him. When I was a teenager, I was most impressed by the following story. A girl who was on duty after the 2nd shift was left behind to tidy up the classroom. Since that day their room had already had a lot of classes. By the time she had handled things, the school was practically empty. And so she went out into the corridor of the 2nd floor, locked the classroom, and heard, around the corner of the corridor, someone was walking, footsteps approaching in her direction. So she looked to the other side, waiting to see who else was there, but no one came out from around the corner, and the footsteps continued to echo, and had already clearly passed the corner and were approaching her. The girl ran downstairs on a brick chute and told the guard there about the incident. He went up to the 2nd floor with her, walked back and forth, silence. Then the guard told the girl that she was imagining things and they headed for the staircase downstairs. As they approached the stairs, the girl heard a couple of quiet steps literally out of thin air, but the guard was either deaf or inattentive, or these sounds really only she could hear, but he did not notice anything. And since it was already late evening and there was no one left on the 2nd floor after them, the guard turned off the light in the corridor by the stairs, so the lamps would not waste electricity all night. And then the girl fainted when she saw in the darkness how literally behind the guard's back, there were glowing human feet in boots, as if they had been torn off.